This is Let Your Voice Be Heard, right here on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Seriously, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey. Welcome.
Happy Daylight Saving.
Oh, God, don't remind me. I am still recovering, but I'm so happy to be here. Welcome to Let Your Voice Be Heard, where we talk politics, social issues, foreign policy, pop culture, and we do that from a very diverse, multicultural perspective. My name is Selena Hill. You can find me on Instagram at Miss Selena Hill, and shout out to all of my followers. Day by day, it just keeps growing, and thank you guys.
You so
for
popular
on Instagram.
You so famous.
Well, my name is Stanley Fritz. I'm also on Instagram. I'm booked and busy. No, I'm not. Just kidding. I'm broke. Go ahead, Selena. Finish your introduction.
Oh, I was done. That's pretty much done.
You're
Stanley?
done? Okay, this is Stanley Fritz, your favorite engineer on the PC 1s and 2s, and I am also the whisperer of the ratchet musics. So trust me, I will make sure it's rocking on here. But you won't Facebook Live on here because Facebook doesn't let us play music. But anyways, if you want to find me, you can find me on the Twitter streets at Stan Fritz. You can find me on the IG streets at Stan Fritz. If you want to find me on the Facebook space where I talk garbage all day, it is Stanley Goodhair Fritz because of a college mistake. And of course, Snapchat still exists, and I don't really use it. But
Stanley, are you hot? You and the
Am I
Scully
hot?
up in the warm studio?
I don't I feel pretty cool right now.
He also has
you guys
a
close the
sweatshirt.
door.
And he also has a sweatshirt on that says "Black men don't cheat."
We don't.
I love that sweatshirt.
According to Jet Magazine, 150% of black men are faithful in everything.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, Alyssa.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I still think I have the best shirt on right now.
I don't know. Stanley's top's yours.
I don't know. It says PHUCKING vote.
And I was literally about to I was thinking
She
of
was
the
going to
word.
say it out loud.
I'm like, what is
and
that?
then we would have had to blurt it out.
Yep.
And then you would have missed this next
Finger
7
on that
seconds
drop button.
It's a
of this
profane
show.
word, guys.
It is? I didn't know.
No, for those who because the spelling.
The FCC says we're not allowed to say that word on the radio, but you can read it on my shirt if you're watching on Facebook Live. Anyways, I am your political legal correspondent, and I am very chipper, even though we lost an hour of sleep. If you can't tell, that's
Speak for
called
yourself.
caffeine.
Yeah, I had a
Just
large
in case
coffee.
everybody needed to know. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Alyssa Fuchs. That's ILYSSAFUCHS, not spelled PH, not spelled with the K. And you can also find me on Twitter at Alyssa Fuchs. Again, that's ILYSSAFUCHS, or on Instagram, Alyssa.Fuchs, spelled the same way. I will not spell it a third time. And of course, you can also leave a comment on the Politically Preposterous fan page. That's facebook.com/politically preposterous, or at Poll Preposterous on Twitter.
I just want to tell Amy my hoodie is not anti-black. Thank you very much.
What
Hey,
is
you
that
are
about?
a bully. Black men don't cheat. We are lovers of blackness.
Hello. I
Hello.
am also a lover of blackness. My name is Jackie Cohen. I am political correspondent for the show. I haven't been here in so long, you guys.
Yeah,
Have you been here
we
in
thought you
2019?
quit.
Yeah, I thought
Is this
I
your
quit. No, I was in January
Right.
a couple times, but I think all of February I missed.
It's a short month.
It's a short month. I'm
I love
very
how Black who missed Black History Month.
Listen.
Mm.
I was out celebrating. I couldn't be here. But I'm very, very happy to be back, and I'm very, very tired and missing that 1 hour of sleep that I desperately needed.
But seriously.
But guys, you know what this means? It
Spring.
means
Spring is coming.
Sprunging, and
Spring is sprunging,
spring is
exactly.
sprunging.
Not in New York
but
City.
also, you're going to get an hour of extra daylight every day.
That's true. That's a good thing.
It's
But
gonna
anyway, you
stay
should follow
nice.
me on Twitter. Follow me on Instagram at Jackie Cohen. I spell it JAQICOHEN. Tweet at me. Tweet your love. Tweet your
Yes.
questions.
Tweet your complaints about
Please
the
do
MTA.
not tweet your complaints. I knew that was coming, and do not do
You
that.
set yourself up for it.
I know. Ugh.
Do not
Anyway.
do not send her your complaints. Send them to at Andrew Cuomo.
Or call 1-800-223-9797.
What is
No,
that?
no. We don't want people to. Oh wait, never mind.
Was that our phone
That's
number,
Hot
Stanley?
No, that's
97.
Hot 97. Am I the only one who listens to Hot 97?
No, I knew it
Yeah.
was. It took me a second to connect. No. But seriously, if you have any complaints about the MTA, that's at Andrew Cuomo on Twitter.
I think
Right.
it's NYGov or something.
And then for those who don't know, Jackie is actually spearheading the MTA strap hangers campaign.
yeah.
So that's why we always poke fun at her. And every time I think of when I'm crossing a bridge, I think of Jackie.
Oh my
I
God,
think of
that's
congestion
so
pricing.
funny. So
I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
no,
true,
I
though.
mean, I think I have a very New York job, which is that I get paid to complain about the subway professionally, which is something. I mean, we all kind of do.
Like as a Jewish woman, I just want to kvetch about the subway
I mean,
all the time.
it's
so
truly,
you actually
it's
get
truly
paid.
the greatest job on earth.
Jackie gets paid to
not
kvetch.
very much, but I do to complain about it. So it's
Your
great.
work is very appreciated, Jackie.
By some people.
You ride the subway, don't you?
I ride my bike.
Yeah.
So do I, but not when it's snowing out.
So anyway, what are we talking about today, guys?
We have a great show lined up. We're going to be talking about reparations. It is time, and I know that a lot of the political candidates are talking about it. A lot of them are just like skirting around it, but we want to talk about real ways to implement and execute reparations, and if it's economically feasible. If you ask me, it's definitely overdue, and I think there are ways that we could really have a real discussion about reparations. So we're going to talk about that. Of course, everyone is still buzzing and talking about R. Kelly's explosive interview. If anyone caught SNL last night, like I did, the cold open was that interview. Like they did a really good job just mocking R. Kelly. And all of that. So yeah, we have a great show lined up, and of course, if you want to let your voice be heard, you can do so if you're watching us via Facebook Live right now. Leave those comments. You can also call us up at 212-650-6903. Yep, and you can tweet us at BeHeard
_.
Radio.
And I want to say I wasn't here last week, so I'm very happy to be here as well.
Oh.
Where were you last week? You were all workationing in Vegas.
No, I was really working.
With fancy people. She was like taking photos with Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris.
She was filming the stuff.
But at least Alyssa actually liked my photo. Thank you, Alyssa,
like 30,
not
30,
Stanley, who
3,600.
purposefully did not like my photos.
Look at that. It's time to go to break. We'll be right back, guys. And we are back on Let Your
You're
Voice
so
Be Heard.
crazy.
If you're listening on the podcast, absolutely nothing happened, right, Facebook Live people? You know, sometimes white people get things right, like EDM music on certain songs. And guys, we are not just here to talk about EDM music. We are here to talk about the news stories that got you the most upset or excited or confused this week in this news roundup. Selena, give it to me.
Starting with R. Kelly. So, of course,
Oh my God.
R. Kelly had,
I'm fighting for my life, Selena.
He's finally speaking out. Apparently, he's fighting for his life. His performance during that Gayle King interview was. It was great.
out of control.
It was, but it was great acting. Like, I don't know if he was acting, but for him to be able to tap that deep into emotion,
Do you think
and
he was?
express it?
I just feel like, and I think Stanley shared like something saying sort of the same thing, that like that's not like the behavior of an innocent person, right?
Yeah.
To like explode in that sort of like outrageous way. That's not, he's clearly like he's fighting against what people are saying about him, but like that's not. Oh God.
I act the same way when Marilyn asked me why I didn't take out the garbage. I'm like, I'm fighting for my life. You gotta get you get that good defensive bag. You get little tears out, then you don't get in trouble for doing stuff you're supposed to do.
I mean, look, I'll say this as a criminal defense attorney. There's a court of public opinion and there's a court of law.
Right.
And in the court of law, he is looked at as innocent until proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and as he should be. In the court of public opinion, we have the ability to discuss whether or not we think he made himself look more or less quote unquote guilty in that interview. But I will say this, if you're charged with a crime, you probably shouldn't do a public interview on TV. And I wonder what lawyer of his told him this was a good idea, because my thought is his lawyer probably said, you shouldn't do this interview. And he was like, I'm going to do it anyway, which, speaks to his ego and just how big it is. Because really, the truth is, if you are facing criminal charges, you should not go on TV and publicly say anything about those charges, because, that part of, Law and Order that everybody always remembers, anything you can say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Yeah, so that happens. And so anything he says in this interview could potentially be used against him in the
Well,
criminal
hold
case.
on. Just because he did the interview doesn't mean that he had women in his basement, locked up in cages, tied up in chains, who couldn't come up or eat or sleep or anything like that. No one said anything like that, all right?
Unless they needed shoes from the store.
Exactly. It isn't like he said that on live television in between tears.
What I found, I guess, the most disturbing was the interview that Gayle did with two of the victims who are currently living with him now. They call themselves his girlfriends, and like one was really defensive. Like Gail was like, so, you two, do you share him? And they were like, yeah. And then they were like, do you share him in the bedroom? And she was like, first of all, Gail, you're not going to talk about what I do in the bedroom, because as a woman, we don't talk about that.
Wait, she came to her as a woman?
She was like, would you talk about what you do in the bedroom as a woman, Gail?
Hold on. First of all, Negro facts. When someone comes to you as a woman, you got to hang up the phone. Everyone knows that.
But that's what she said. And then the other woman, the other young woman who was 21, she seemed like she was trying to follow a script, and she seemed like she was getting choked up. And then it turns out, Gail said, during that interview, R. Kelly was creepily walking behind them and coughing loudly to remind them that he could hear them. So basically what Gail was saying is that he was intimidating them during the interview from outside the door.
Yo, I know he can't read, but he can't be this dumb.
I mean, look, I just want to remind you, Aaliyah's first album was called Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. So, I mean, look.
and there's a lot of people that are talking about these women and saying, well, why are they defending him? Why are they saying all this stuff? But I think that these women, if they are being abused, right, which there's a lot of reason to believe that they are, if this is like an abuser tactic to get women to depend on them, or to get the person that they're abusing to depend on them and to sort of psychologically abuse them as well, not just physically. And so if it's very likely that he's abusing them emotionally so that they're not going to speak out against him.
Right. And I'll just point out that, that's why New York actually has a mandatory arrest policy for all domestic violence allegations.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And allegations of abuse by a domestic partner. Yeah. It's like, the idea being that sometimes women would call the police, and then when the police would get there, they'd be like, no, I recant. Yeah. And so New York passed this policy that says if you make a phone call or if somebody else calls the police and reports a domestic violence incident, the police have to make an arrest. Even if later on it turns out that the allegations were untrue, it's basically for the court system and the judicial system to sort that out, not for the police to sort that out, because they don't want to get in a situation where a woman is being abused, calls the police, then recants when the police show up because she doesn't want her significant other to be arrested, and then it turns out he continues to abuse her and she ends up injured or worse. So that's why we have that policy in New York. But
speaking of
before we get there, I do want to just mention two comments. Justin Toro says, how about him lurking in the background though? Shake my head. And Edward Fitzgerald says, didn't R. Kelly admit to buying humans? I don't know the answer to that.
Did.
But
what did
he was like, what kind of father would let me buy her daughter? Because that's what he did.
Oh yeah,
that was, I think, a really interesting part of this too, is that he talked about how he has done nothing wrong whatsoever, and then sort of goes into, well, these parents let this happen, it's their fault, and like as if his behavior was inevitable. It's just that the parents are the ones that messed up by letting him do, he's going to do what he's going to do, and the parents were the ones that should have been looking out.
It was, speaking of court and holding people accountable for abuses, someone who has not been held accountable is Paul Manafort, who we learned has been sentenced to just 4 years in prison, despite the fact of stealing money, helping to steal an election, and corruption for decades.
Right, and a lot of criminal defense attorneys have pointed this out on Twitter and on other social media platforms. One criminal defense attorney who I know very well, his name is Scott Heschinger. He's with the Brooklyn Defenders. Tweeted that, just for context, one of his clients got basically 6 years in prison. Although he tweeted it actually out in months, and I don't have the tweet in front of me at the moment. For like stealing an ice cream bar. And so this just goes back to the fact that black people who commit low-level nonviolent infractions for things like theft, when it's, or for drugs, are sentenced to far longer amounts of time in state prisons, which is obviously far worse than where Paul Manafort's going to go. These are white-collar. He's going to Camp Cupcake, as we call it.
Is that really why?
Camp Cupcake?
Yeah, because,
it's light work.
It's light work. Yeah, it's easy. Yeah. It's easy to do your time.
They have intramural baseball and basketball leagues. They have classes. They have arts and crafts. It's great.
Is it like a country club?
My friend was in federal prison for a couple of years for, allegedly. He was actually there. But can I just add to the fact that he has less time than the black woman who got 5 years for voting illegally. So apparently she was formerly incarcerated. She thought she was eligible to vote. She was not. She didn't know. She voted, and now she's doing 5 years. And she just lost her appeal to this vote as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And she's serving 5 years, and he's serving
Yeah.
Barely.
He's not going to do the whole
He's not
four.
going to do the right.
Which, not for nothing, this is just another element of the reparations conversation that we're going to talk about. Is that even though, really the context of our conversation is going to be about historical and what we should do now, the criminal justice system continues to perpetuate Jim Crow, and there continues to be a situation where there's unequal justice depending on the color of your skin.
Absolutely. On that note, I know we do have to take a quick break. We will come back and talk about reparations, but I did want to just mention really quickly Amy Jones on our Facebook Live. She wrote something about R. Kelly that I can't help but to agree with. She says he's a narcissistic, gaslighting, serial pedophile. That's a great way to sum it up. Thank you for that, Amy.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
I mean, is it still allegedly?
Legally speaking, it is.
Legally speaking,
yes.
In the court of public opinion, you can speak your words.
Absolutely.
Nasty.
All right, guys, so don't go anywhere. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard. When we come back, we're going to be talking about reparations. Is it time?
Diamonds on my neck. I like boarding jets. I like more than sex. But nothing in this world.
Better have my money. You better have my money. Money. We are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard on 90.3 FM. WHCR, the voice of Harlem. If you are wondering why I'm singing that song in such an aggressively caucasus voice, it is because we are talking about reparations. And I wanted to imagine what a whitey white man would sound like singing Rihanna's Itch Better Have My Money. I thought Chick Better Have My Money. But mock me, lady, tonight. But anyways, guys, we are not here to take all the spice out of Rihanna's food. I just want to do two things right now before we jump into the segment. One, I want to tell you that last week, Alyssa Fuchs and my friend Meredith Barnes said that boxed macaroni and cheese was delicious. And I told you how deep racism is in America because they thought boxed macaroni and cheese is good. And the second thing is that we are here to talk about reparations, but not in the way that they would do it in mainstream America, where they ask the question and someone says yes or no, and then they move on. But we want to actually have a deep-seated conversation about whether it makes sense, how much money would go out, who would get paid if it was even money, and why there are some people who don't even want to support this, i.e. most white people. Now, the way we got to this conversation is because a lot of the presidential candidates, i.e. Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris, have already said they support this. There's also another candidate, he's a little bit less on mainstream, Andy Yang. He says he supports reparations. Bernie Sanders did an interview on the Breakfast Club, and I'm going to play the clip in about 2 seconds, in which they asked him why he doesn't support reparations. And Bernie says he's not interested in just giving somebody a check. That was Bernie's response to the question about reparations. And it's got a lot of us people who feel like reparations is deserved, i.e. me, and probably most of the people in the studio, thinking, well, why doesn't Bernie support it, and if his criticism is right? So before we jump into this segment, I want you guys to just have a second to hear exactly what Bernie is saying about reparations and why he supports it or not. So take this clip for what it is, and then we'll jump right in, guys, all right? Cool.
Now, why does it seem like this week you've been kind of dodging the reparations question? Senator Harris and Senator Warren have both kind of spoken out and said that they agree with some form of reparations.
Well, what the question is, I'm not dodging the question. The question is, what do we mean by reparations? I mean, it seems to me a lot of people mean a lot of different things. To my mind, it means that we have to deal with the fact that there is enormous disparity between the black community and the white community, and that issue has got to be addressed. And I've indicated to you some of the ways that I think it should be addressed.
Well, I think they mean some type of economic empowerment to the African descendants of slaves.
But what does that mean, economic empowerment? I just talked about the fact that I would do my best to change the banking system to make sure that we end racism, that we pay attention to distressed communities, that people get the loans they need to make the investments they need.
What about straight cash payouts?
No.
How much you want,
You
Charlamagne?
agree with that? Why don't you agree with that?
All right, guys, we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard. What you just heard was a clip of Bernie Sanders talking to Charlamagne from the Breakfast Club, saying that he does not agree with giving reparations to African Americans or descendants of African slaves, and he says that his policies would actually be the solution of fixing the banking systems and addressing income inequality.
Can I ask, is he saying that he doesn't agree, or he's saying, I want to know what it looks like?
Well, later on in the clip, he actually says flat out, no, I'm not going to cut a check.
Okay.
So we didn't get to that part. If folks feel like we need to, we can definitely go back to it. Selena is giving me the big eyes, which tells me she definitely wants me to get to it.
That's a great point, Jackie, because I think that in the beginning of the interview, he was just like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And he did the same thing on CNN where they were like, this black woman asked him directly, do you believe in reparations? And Bernie has continually said, what do you mean? But Stanley has the clip where he says very directly, no, I don't believe or support reparations. So we're going to get to that now.
Right.
What about straight cash payouts?
No.
How much you want,
You
Sean?
agree with that? Why don't you agree with that?
Well, first of all, you mean just a check to every African American?
Yes.
Well, then there's a check to every Native American who were nearly wiped out when the settlers first came here. I think the way we go forward is to build America together. There are distressed communities, white communities. There are distressed Latino communities. Right now, what you have is a government owned and controlled by big money interests who worries about Wall Street and the drug companies. We're going to change that. And we're going to pay attention to the needs of working families and low-income families in this country in a way that you have never seen.
All right, guys, we are back again, and Bernie Sanders has explicitly said no, that he's not going to do that, and they're going to work on helping all Americans and getting policies that fix the lives of all Americans. So that is Bernie's stance. For those of you who have known me for a while or just have known me for the last 2 years, you know that I've had issues with Bernie Sanders and his stance on people of color and African Americans in particular. I will not get into that right now, but no, I got lots of spice in my thoughts at the moment. Instead, I want to open up this up to the panel and to all the beautiful people listening on the show right now. If it's at all possible, quick reaction to Bernie's no, and also for you, are you for or against reparations? And if you are for it, what should reparations look like? And I'll start with you, Selena.
Still, that was like 3 questions in one. Okay, I'm going to try to break it down and be quick. Bernie, reaction. I am not surprised. In 2016, he also was very direct about not supporting reparations. I think that it's going to sway maybe a handful of people, but I think that African Americans, if they have been supportive of Bernie, I don't see a lot, or at least the ones that I've spoken to say that they're going to stop supporting him, because at this point, I frankly, it would be a shock if any presidential candidate really stood for and stood up for reparations and thought that they could actually win the White House, the presidency, by doing that. Again, like you mentioned, Stanley, reparations is not supported by a lot of white Americans, nor is it supported by Republicans and people who want to win some of those blue collar worker votes, some of those, white votes in middle America. They're not going to say that. So I'm not surprised by Bernie. And honestly, I'll probably still support him. Do we need reparations? Of course. Generational wealth accumulated by white people over centuries has been because of systematic oppression and racism. I truly believe that there's no way to truly have racial equality, equity, and healing without some type of reparation. And we'll talk about that later in the show, because history has shown that when we have institutionalized and direct concerted efforts to wipe people out or to, make them property, when this has happened in other groups and communities, they were repaid, rightfully so. So, I think that it's overdue. It's time for African Americans and descendants of slaves to also be, compensated in some way.
Yeah, no. I absolutely agree with that. So just to take the questions in order, I, too, was not necessarily surprised by Bernie Sanders' position on this issue. Bernie Sanders has very often taken this position that we shouldn't necessarily focus on one group and what they need. We should focus on the overall economic development. I mean, this is a man who has made his entire candidacy in 2016, and even going back further than that, when he was running for Senate, about economic inequality and the way in which economic inequality affects all people, affects working class people, and also affects people of color. So it's no surprise to me there that his line would basically be to stay on message and say, well, we don't need to deal with this issue directly. We need to deal with the issue of economic inequality. And once we do, the rising tide lifts all boats. That doesn't surprise me. Personally, I sort of also fall with Selena. I'm still inclined to support Bernie Sanders because I still think that he is potentially the best candidate in the field. Although, as I mentioned a few shows back when we did our election kickoff, I'm very intrigued by Elizabeth Warren as well. Finally, as to the need for reparations, I absolutely agree that there is a need for reparations. I am curious to see what that kind of thing would look like. I don't know if it is simple as cutting a check, although I do think that cutting a check is one element of it. And I will just point out there are a lot of people and a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, including people of color, that say that it is easy to be lulled into the idea of supporting reparations, but that Senator Senator Sanders makes a valid point, which is not being conveyed well by himself or by the media, and that is that reparations in the form of single lump sum payments will not necessarily diminish racial inequality, and it could be just something that's akin to an extra tax refund check, and a real proposal for reparations has to be something more robust and include investments in education, home ownership, business services, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, I would take that one step further and also needs to include major criminal justice reform, and is not necessarily just about money. But I do think money is an important part of it.
Yeah.
It is not something we should poo-poo away.
Yeah, I mean, to agree with both of you, I think that I'm not surprised in the least that he's not standing for reparations. Although I do wonder if, he's clearly trying to get a certain vote, right? He's working to get the white working class vote. I wonder, I mean, we seek, not to like defend him at all, but I do wonder if he would be supportive of it more if he was in the White House. I think that he's trying to get a certain vote, and his companions like Liz Warren do support it, and presidents will often say that they don't support something to get the vote. Like I always think of Barack Obama saying that he didn't support marriage equality when obviously he did, right? But it was to get into the White House. So I don't know, but I think that I'm not surprised that he doesn't support it. To the question of whether or not we do, I absolutely do. In my own personal experience, I'm Jewish. My husband's Jewish and is a descendant from Holocaust survivors. He is eligible for German citizenship based on the fact that his grandparents both fled Germany during the Holocaust. I think that is, Selena touched on the point about healing, right? That does a lot, right? The fact that this is a country that exterminated millions of us, and that is now saying you can come back and you can get citizenship and you can, you belong here. I think that says a lot about and does a lot to help the healing process, right? And so obviously, like, we can't offer something like citizenship to people who are already citizens of this country, but there needs to be a major sort of bold step in repairing this very wounded relationship between our country and Black people, right? Who have for so long suffered economically, suffered from racism, suffered from brutal policies, suffered from the criminal justice system, like we talked about before. And so to Stanley's question about what does it look like, I agree with you, Alyssa. Like, I don't know that it just looks like cutting a check. I think it has to go beyond that. And I don't know, I'm not the expert here. I don't know if it means like free college or, sort of like bringing institutional access to it. But I think it has to go beyond just simply writing a check. Not that I'm against writing a check, but I think it has to do more.
All right, thanks guys for that. I'm going to try and get my response in there as well, but I want to give Alyssa a chance to read a couple of comments we're getting on Facebook Live.
Yeah, so Amy Jones says cut the check, and she also says, what about Native Americans, which is a point that's raised a lot, obviously.
Well, no, she said that Bernie is saying.
What about Native Americans? Okay, sorry. Yeah, I read that incorrectly. That is, though, a point that has been raised a lot about, the fact that we have other marginalized groups in this country. But, to Jackie's point, I would say that, yes, we can't give people citizenship in the way Germany's offering citizenship, but Black people are still treated as second-class citizens in this country, and there has to be a moral reckoning about that. Stanley.
Yeah.
Cut the Native Americans that check too.
Yeah, right.
So I get really annoyed with that kind of argument. What about the Native Americans? Yeah, cut them a check and cut them some land. I think that my issue with Bernie is that he's not stupid, but he continues to make the argument that if you address income inequality now and the issues we have now that'll help Black people, it will have some improvement. But the fact of the matter is, as Naledi said in one of the comments, she said that we built this country on our back, and because of the way this country has been set up, African Americans have been set up 10 steps behind everybody else when it comes to access to property, education, money, or even just basic equity. And Bernie Sanders things would improve those things, but they'd still be behind everyone else, which is why reparations is important. We can't talk about equality and helping everybody else until you solve the original sin, which affected African Americans and also Native American people.
Yeah, I think he started talking about a rising tide lifts all boats, but that's not, we know that that's not true equally, right? That it may be true that it lifts all boats, but not to the same level.
Yeah, because when that tide starts to go back again, guess who's going to be the first one to suffer the consequences? Mm-hmm. Black people. And that's just the fact of the matter. But now, folks, when we have this conversation about reparations, they usually ask two questions. One, what about Native Americans and everybody else? But then two, who's going to pay for it? Do we expect just people down the block to give their dollars towards this? So how would you fund this? Let's start with Alyssa, because she has an interesting way.
Right. So, this is interesting. Obviously, most people say that it's got to be taxpayer funded. And that's the reason why reparations a lot of times gets pushback, essentially, and mostly from white people, is because they're like, well, why should I pay for it? My family came over from Italy. My family came over from Ireland. We were subjected to racism and discrimination against us when we first immigrated here. We are not, my family did not enslave people on plantations in the South. Why should I have to pay? Why should American taxpayers have to pay? And that then puts them in a position where they want to be against it. And so there was a really interesting article in 2016 in the New York Times, and it is about the fact that there was life insurance policies that New York Life Insurance took out on slaves. The idea being that New York Life Insurance was getting started. They needed to sell policies. And so they started selling all these life insurance policies on slaves. And so there's been some proposals to say there are major Fortune 500 companies in this country right now that have made or been able to generate their wealth because of, policies on slaves or because of slave labor. And therefore, those companies, they should be the largest group or contributor to a fund that would be to pay reparations. That's not to say that taxpayers as a general whole shouldn't have to pay at all, but part of this proposal would be to basically look back at the records, the historical records, figure out whose family owned slaves, figure out the way in which wealth has transferred from slavery to today, figure out which companies are currently in a position to make uber profits because of the fact that they were once controlled by slave labor or once maybe able to make all their money on slave labor, and make them pay the lion's share of the money that needs to go to reparations, and therefore it will not be on the backs of a lot of the taxpayers.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I think reparations, again, should not come in a form of just a one-time check. I know some of the candidates are positioning, when they talk about reparations, they talk about that. Like Kamala Harris, for instance, she says she would give like a $500 rebate back to families who make less than $100,000. And we know a disproportionate amount of those people, she would give $500. It's not a lot of money, but what she says is that can help with finding a babysitter and groceries.
But
and
this
stuff
is
like
why
that.
this is not. Sorry to jump in, but this is why I don't support just cutting a check, because $500 is nothing, right? I mean, I think that it could go a certain amount of the way, but we're talking about like generations of institutional disenfranchisement of Black people. I think that it needs to come in the form of like free college or free,
Absolutely.
because that goes a lot farther.
Cut me a check too.
Sure.
Hold on, Stanley. So you're saying you would? Well, how would you quantify that check?
So let's do it basically like this. Let's talk about the basic field slave that would work about 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. If you're doing a minimum wage, let's do it by, let's say $7.75 an hour. It's still going to be a little bit over $1,000 every single week. Let's quantify that, right? Over the life of slavery. And then every person who is a descendant of a slave in America should get all of that non-tax. And then we give them free college tuition. And then we give them housing vouchers. And then we do criminal justice reform. And then we do the other pieces. And then after that, once you've gotten just through slavery, now we got to cut a check for what happened during Jim Crow and the race laws. And that's a whole different kind of conversation, because you still got to reimburse us for that. Then once we're done with that piece right there, then you get to the policies that have hurt all Black people in general. So in these first two rounds of reparations, I, as a patient descent, would not get U.S. dollars. But don't worry, France, I'm coming for you.
Well, I mean, that just goes back to the question of how do you pay for it, right? The latest estimate was this article in Newsweek, which said it would cost just one round of reparations, not including some of the other institutional things that would need to happen, which I think we all agree need to happen, would cost $13 trillion. So obviously, I said there could be a proposal to make these big companies that benefit from slavery pay for it. You would also need taxpayer dollars. Where else do you find the money to do it, and to do it right? Because we don't want to take it
from the companies, take it from the rich families that got their money from slavery, take it from the U.S. government. Like everyone is going to have to pay up. It would be a huge transferal of wealth, which is also why I think, I'll say that for my conclusion, but which is why I think it'll be difficult to get, because everyone is giving up coins. And it's not just these companies, it's also whatever European companies that also benefited from American slavery. Everyone has to give it up. Jackie, stop talking. Go ahead.
I think I have a bigger point, but maybe if we have to go to break, I'll make it when we come back.
Oh, no, sure. And I'll just say that, I don't disagree with Stanley about the check, but I think that the damage that was done to African slaves is insurmountable. I think that we also have to take into account the psychological damage for a fact that generations of people could not read, and studies show that if you don't read, you're not exercising certain mental functions of the brain and connectivity. So like you can't quantify that. So like, yeah, you can give me 20 million, you can give me 20,000 or $20. It does not account to the damage that was done.
You should step for your closing. We'll be right back, guys. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard.
How many lawyers you got? A lot. How many times you got shot?
We are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard on 90.3 FM WHCR, the voice of Harlem. If you are just tuning in, this is Stanley Fritz. I'm here with Alyssa Fuchs, Selena Hill, and of course, Jackie Cohen. And we are talking about reparations and why these people need to run me and my people all of our coins. But when we went on break, Alyssa had a couple of comments she wanted to read, and I know Jackie had some things to say as well. So Alyssa, give us our comments, and let's hear from Jackie.
So Edward Fitzgerald says the rising tide sounds like a trickle-down theory. I would agree with that comment. And Amy Jones says, you're right, how do we quantify generational trauma?
You can't quantify generational trauma, but you can try. Jackie?
No, it's a really good question, and I think that that kind of trauma just doesn't go away, and it's something that you like are burdened with generation to generation. We were talking. Oh, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, no, because I feel like there's a lot of pushback that people get, that we hear from people when it comes from reparations. And I feel like, as you touched on, when it comes to the history of reparations for other communities, we've seen it happen, right? I mean, there was some resistance when Germany gave it to the Jewish community and Jewish victims, but we also see how well that's played out. And I've read where people of German descent said they actually felt better. It was it was more moral process and progress for the country.
Right.
So, this has been happening throughout generations, but why not for African Americans?
It's a great question. And I think to the point that we were talking about a little bit earlier about these like major corporations that built their wealth largely on slave labor, to have to pay up for this, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that we also need to be looking at how they're making their money today, right? Because many of which are still using slave labor or still using or paying people across maybe not in this country, but are paying people poverty wages to do labor for them overseas. And, this is something that it's an issue that still persists to this day. So I think that these are corporations definitely that need to be held accountable for past actions, but for current actions as well.
I just want to read you another comment that we're getting from Gregory Neesmith. Shout out to Greg. He says, in addition to a lump sum, 400 years of no federal and state income taxes from 2020 to 2420, interest-free mortgages for the next 400 years, funding for public elementary schools, high schools, and historically black colleges and universities that matches the budgets of the best schools in the area and state. There's more, but that's a start.
Great point, Greg.
So here's my question to you guys now. Why is there always so much pushback when we talk about reparations for black people when we've done reparations for Japanese internment camps? From what I understand, there's been some sort of form of reparations for survivors of the Holocaust. Why is there so much pushback on reparations for black people in general? Selena? I
think it's because people in this country fail to understand or really understand the devastation that has happened. I think for a large part, this country has been in denial of what happened. I think that because our history has been whitewashed so much, children aren't taught how much damage has been done in this country and how this country was built on the backs of slaves. Like, we still teach our children the stories about Christopher Columbus, this white man saving the savages, the savage Native Americans, and building America. And we glorify people like President Andrew Jackson, who was the person who stopped the 40 acres and a mule policy from going into effect. So no, I think that when we continue to present history in this way, which presents white people and particularly white men as heroes, and we neglect the fact that many of them were slave owners and holders, you get this idea that, hey, society isn't really that bad for black people, and you start feeding into those stereotypes and those stigmas that for some reason we call murder on ourselves, and that when we run away from cops and get shot in the back 9 times, we deserved it. So I think it's just mass ignorance. And Bernie Sanders and the rest of the people who running for candidate who want to talk about reparations, I really hope they can do a better job in articulating the necessity of it.
Yeah, I think that I don't even think that it's because people don't want to acknowledge our racist history. I think it's genuinely because white people are afraid of empowered black people, right? Because white people know the history of this country and they know how black people have been treated for generations, and they're afraid that that's going to happen to them if black people are to be empowered in this country. And I think that we've seen that with like the gun control debate in this country and sort of the rise of the NRA and how they've gotten their power, which was a direct response really to the Black Panther movement, right? And the fact that black people were arming themselves legally, we all of a sudden we see the NRA become one of the most powerful lobby organizations in this country because white people were afraid of what were to happen if black people were to get guns, right? Legally. So I think that people know. I think that people genuinely understand that we have a deeply racist history in this country that we're still experiencing to this day. And I think they're afraid of what's going to happen.
Yes, absolutely.
If the playing field is leveled out.
And I just wanted to add because, when we talk about, Japanese Americans, that happened in our lifetime. In 1988, it was U.S. President Ronald Reagan who apologized to the U.S. government for Japanese internment camps. And then they passed an act which paid $20,000 in reparations to over 800,000 victims of internment. That equates to $1.1 billion that was initially allocated, and then an additional 400,000. So, I mean, if this was 30 years ago when something like this happened, but yet have African Americans ever received an apology? Who has apologized for slavery?
I mean, nobody's really apologized. I mean, the point is that we have to have a reckoning. You literally have a situation where the reason why you can't get political support for this is because white people seem to think that black people are just asking for free stuff, or Native Americans are asking for free stuff. At no point well, I guess some white people that are woke figure this out, but the majority of white people don't figure out that, hey, nobody's asking for anything that's free. People are asking to be compensated for what was taken from them or what they should have been compensated to begin with. As Stanley points out, even if we figured out the number of hours on average a slave worked and we times that by the current federal minimum wage, that's just compensating people for their labor that they should have been paid for to begin with. We're talking about Native Americans. You have a massive amount of land that was taken, which is a transfer of wealth. Why? Because that land is worth money. And so nobody is asking for just a free handout. Nobody wants free money. What people are asking for is compensation for past wrongdoings.
Yeah.
And until we compensate people for past wrongdoings, whether that is in the form of a partial cutting a check and also investing in other things that will lift the, people out of poverty, and especially lift Native Americans and black people out of poverty, we are not going to reckon with the original sin of slavery in this country, which we need to do. Otherwise, racism is going to continue to be perpetuated, and racism in America is going to go on and on and on and on and on, and we are going to continue to be in the same situation we are in now, and we're going to continue to have a criminal justice system that locks up people of color and Native Americans at a far higher rate than white people are locked up. So this all goes back to a reckoning, and we have to have this reckoning, otherwise we get nowhere in America. And eventually, what's going to happen is, if we don't deal with this now and in this way, there is going to be some kind of civil war in the future. There's going to be violence, because that is the only way to deal with this issue if it is not dealt with in another way.
Well, I mean, since for our closings now, Jackie, do you have any final thoughts on this?
I think Alyssa said it so well. I think that we as a country need to reckon with this original sin of slavery and with our deeply, deeply racist history, right? And I don't see how else we can do that. A verbal apology at this point is not enough. And I think that, to Alyssa's fantastic point, there was labor done to build this country. Work was done for free by black slaves to build this country, to build this country's economy, to build wealth for white people, to build corporations in this country. And it's never been reckoned with. And people who deserved to be paid for that labor never were. And I think that it's fair for the descendants of those people to simply ask to be repaid for the labor that their ancestors did to build this country and to make it what it is now. And I think that if we are ever going to truly reckon with our racist history as a nation, reparations absolutely need to be put into place.
Selena?
And it extends beyond reparations. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. was calling for reparations in 1968, but, he and other black leaders have pointed out the fact that even in 1935, the Social Security Act intentionally excluded farmers and domestic workers, two occupations that were predominantly black. So basically, while FDR was lifting up white Americans from the depths of the Great Depression, black people were intentionally held back. And it's not just with that act. Even less than 2% of $120 billion worth of government-backed home loans were awarded to white people primarily. So again, these were systems, tools, acts, policies, legislation that intentionally helped white Americans build generational wealth and safety nets. Meanwhile, we were intentionally held back. And I think that we definitely need an acknowledgement. And honestly, I would start from there, because I think that if this country could acknowledge it and could finally apologize, and Gregory Neesmith just commented and said, why not put apology in the Constitution? I think that's a great idea, because that's the first step in racial healing.
I don't want racial healing. I want my money. I want my money. I want my land. I want my retribution. I want my respect. And one of the biggest reasons that probably will not happen in my generation is not just because of racism, because we know that white people have an intrinsic hatred and fear of black people. That's a big piece of it. But it's also because of capitalism. Because if we're really being honest about what you need to do to truly give a reasonable amount of reparations to all the victims of racism, which includes the descendants of African slaves, but also the people who have come into the country since then, like the Caribbean people like myself, the people who come in from Africa, Afro-Latinos, Native Americans, everybody else. You are talking about a transfer of wealth that would destroy white America. It would destroy the United States government. It's too much money. And I think that once you start to have that conversation, if I am a person of power, if I am a powerful white person, if I am a corporation, you know that once you start to have that conversation and you see that you need to do it, it's just the floodgates opening up for you to have to make amends for every mistake you have made. Because like I said earlier, you're not just paying for slavery, which is about 250 years to 300 years, even though there are some documentation showing that slavery lasted until 1960 and some parts of the South. Yes, that's right, 1960. You also had to pay back for Jim Crow. You also had to pay back for what Selena mentioned with the Great Depression, all the financial benefits that people of color were blocked out from. Then we got to talk about 1973 all the way up to 2020 and the criminal industrial complex and the war on drugs that has mostly impacted African Americans and black people in general. And when we add all those things up, free college tuition, free health care, land, not mortgage opportunities, give me a damn house and walk away, and a check, they're not ready for that action. So unless folks get it together, the only way we'll get it is, like Alyssa said, bloodshed. So run me my coins before I run them from you. With that being said, we got to get out of here, guys. I'll let Selena close it out because she's better at it.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So thank you so much for everyone who watched and chimed in via Facebook Live. We thank everyone who continued to support us on Patreon. And if you aren't a member on our Patreon account, please sign up. That's patreon.com/BeHeardRadio. And by giving us a monthly subscription, you will continue to support us and all of our financial needs and necessities as we support the issues and causes that you care about most. Until then, happy Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your week as we continue to fight the power. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard.